also welcome the Permanent Secretary, and we're very pleased to see Dan O'Mahony again. Sorry, Mahoney. Marnie. Oh, sorry, Marnie. Sorry. We saw you very recently, and you obviously have the role of the clandestine Channel Threat Commander, so we're very pleased that you're with us today. Just want to make a few brief remarks. It's 9 months since we were able to question a Home Secretary, and obviously a lot has happened since February of this year, with the Rwanda announcement, the crisis at Manston, and our report in the summer on the small boat crossings. So we've got many questions that we want to ask today, and we will start with the issue around asylum seekers, the Channel boat crossings and Manston. But I think it's also right that we remember today that we are coming up to the 1-year anniversary of those 27 who lost their lives crossing the Channel. And also that we recognise in the last few days the sad news of the death of a man who had been detained at Manston. We also note the welcome news that Manston was cleared just before the Home Secretary's appearance at this Select Committee. And it does beg the question why the crisis at Manston was allowed to grow over such an extended period if it has been cleared now. And just finally, I just want to say I am particularly disappointed that a letter dated the 2nd of November from the chairs of 4 select committees, Justice, the Joint Committee on Human Rights and Women and Equalities, plus myself, has not been responded to by the Home Office. We asked for a response by the 16th of November, and that letter arose out of the very disturbing evidence that we heard at our session on Manston. So that is very disappointing that we haven't had the answer to the specific questions that we raised in that letter. And that then leads me on to my specific questions. And these are mainly factual questions that I just want to get some clarity on. So first of all, can I just ask how many judicial reviews have been launched against the Home Office for illegal detention at Manston as of today? Who can tell me that?
Well, if I Madam Chair, thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak to the committee. I really value the opportunity for accountability and transparency. You note I should say at the outset that I also want to offer my condolences and my thoughts in the memory of those 27 who perished almost a year ago on the Channel. Taking a lethal, dangerous journey. And it is a tragedy on a scale that is unacceptable. And I'm very, very sorry and saddened that happened. And any loss of life in this instance is of great sadness. I also want to put on record my heartfelt condolences to all those affected by the death of the person who arrived recently at Manston. There's very little I can say about that because there is an inquest and a coroner's inquiry going on to that. But I do want to put on record, on behalf of the Home Office and everyone who works on the front line in these very challenging circumstances, our thoughts for those who are directly affected. You also mentioned the letter of the 16th of November. I must say I apologise for not getting a reply back to you.
2nd of November we wrote.
Sorry, 2nd of November with the deadline of the 16th of November. Yeah. There has been a processing issue in the Home Office, and we will endeavour to respond very quickly, but I am happy to take any of the questions that are raised in that letter today. The question that you asked me about now is how many judicial reviews we are actually facing. I mean, I speak as someone who was a lawyer employed to defend the Home Office before I was an MP on judicial reviews. So the number will be very high. Yeah. I mean, in terms of the total number of judicial reviews that the Home Office is dealing with.
This issue, on the issue of Manston and illegal detention.
I don't have the number, Chair, but we will write to you with it.
I'm told it's 4. You don't know? You don't know how many judicial reviews on Manston have been launched?
We know that there are judicial reviews on Manston, and we are dealing with them as you would expect in a holistic way. I personally didn't know that there were 4, but we will
Okay,
write confirmation.
I'm rather surprised, if you don't mind me saying. I'm rather surprised you didn't think I might ask that question. But anyway, okay, I just want to be clear now then on the legal status of Manston. So could you just confirm, I don't know if this is the Permanent Secretary who can confirm this, is Manston a holding room and therefore detention is only allowed up to 24 hours? Is that correct?
Well, the Manston Processing Centre is there as fundamentally a centre for a short-term facility for processing.
Yes.
People arrive, and I'll ask
We know
Dan
what
to come
happens
in.
there. I just want to know what the legal status is. Is it a holding room in law?
Do you want to?
It's a short-term holding facility under
Yes, but is it a holding room as set out in the rules?
It's equivalent to a holding room, which means that we can, under the rules, keep people there for 24 hours,
Right.
apart from in exceptional circumstances.
Okay, so that's helpful. So it's a holding room, and you then, in the exceptional circumstances, you can then hold people for a further period of detention. Under the rules, it's very clear that if you want to use that provision and extend detention, there has to be an authorisation made before the 24 hours runs out. So perhaps you're best placed to tell me, did that happen for everybody who was held at Manston beyond 24 hours?
Yeah, there's a process of, at director level, signing off the exceptional circumstances that we can hold people beyond 24 hours. Probably also worth saying there is another legal obligation upon the department, which is to provide accommodation to stop people from being destitute. So, I mean, clearly there were people staying at Manston in excess of 24 hours, but it's also really, really important that we find alternative accommodation when the alternative is destitution.
Was that the exceptional circumstance that was put on for each individual that you were extending the period of detention for? Lack of
Those were the
accommodation.
exceptional circumstances that led to us keeping people there for more than 24 hours.
Okay, I think we'll come on to this, but why was that an exceptional circumstance? Because we all know that the numbers projected for this year were going to exceed the 28,500 from last year coming across on the small boats. So, sorry, I'm not quite clear why this was exceptional. Why did the Home Office not have plans in place to deal with the numbers?
So, as we discussed on your visit, the primary accommodation that we offer to asylum seekers is hotels, and the provision of hotels, the commercial process that we had to go through, the engagement with local MPs and local authorities became very difficult, increasingly difficult.
Why did it become very difficult?
Sorry?
Sorry, why did it become very difficult?
Well, I mean, there are a range of reasons. One is, market supply has become much more difficult, compared to last year when, hotels didn't have people staying in them in the way that they do now.
You've been able to clear it. I mean, we started off by saying that you'd cleared Manston, so I'm a bit confused as to why you're saying hotels were not available, because you've clearly found hotels to put people in now.
Yeah, I mean, the other factor that has worked in our favour over the last few weeks is that the weather has deteriorated significantly, so the number of crossings has dropped. So the number of crossings this November is significantly lower than it was last November, for instance.
The crisis was developing, wasn't it? When I'm looking at the numbers, in August you had nearly 8,500, and then in September 7,900, October 6,900. So you knew these numbers were coming because you were working on the basis of 60,000 people crossing the channel, weren't you?
We certainly anticipated that the numbers would be worse than last year, yes.
Okay.
If I can provide some context as well, and Dan is absolutely correct in everything he said. I think what's happened is we have, during the month of September, it was obvious that there were already an unprecedented, or at least very, very high number of people who were arriving illegally at Dover. We were trying to procure extra accommodation urgently and at pace. It has become incredibly difficult to find accommodation, and that is because of a combination of several factors. We've got an unprecedented number of people arriving here illegally.
Well, I don't think that's the case, Home Secretary.
well,
if I
it
could
is.
just interrupt you there, because actually the numbers are not unprecedented. If you look back to 2002, the number of people claiming asylum was almost twice the claims that you had last year. So I don't think that's actually correct, and that's in our report that we produced in the summer.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. The facts are this is the first time we have had, before the end of the year, by the autumn, 40,000 people arrive illegally at the UK through a dangerous route where they are vulnerable.
Not
where
disputing
they are,
the issue
can I
of
just
the
finish
numbers.
explaining some of the context that I've been dealing with?
Absolutely, but the key is we haven't got that much time.
Yeah.
There's lots of questions we want to ask.
Yeah.
I've got lots of members who want to come in on this. Perhaps I could just move you on to what you actually decided to do as Home Secretary, because there's been lots of media coverage of what happened during September and October. And I just want to ask you, when did you first become aware that there was this crisis developing at Manston, and when were you told that you were potentially in breach of the law by holding people?
Well, I arrived at the Home Office at the beginning of the September in full awareness that there was a crisis with
Crisis when you
illegal
arrived.
migration
Right.
because of the very high... And I just have to finish the point that I was making. There is an unprecedented level of pressure on our asylum accommodation system at the moment. We've never seen 40,000 people arrive in the UK through dangerous and illegal means. We've never had 140,000 people welcomed in good faith, and rightly so, from Ukraine, who are, to some degree, taking up some of our accommodation. We've never seen, in addition to that, another 80,000 people who we are accommodating who are waiting for their asylum claims to process. That all takes up beds and accommodation and estate. It is becoming incredibly difficult to source accommodation, suitable shelter for the unprecedented levels of people coming into this country. We are competing with prisons who want to release people to go into accommodation. We are competing with constituents
With the greatest
who want
respect, the
local authority housing.
Of the context.
But that is important context to explain why it
explain
has
to
been
us,
very
though,
difficult
could you
to
explain
source the
what
accommodation.
you did when you came in as Home Secretary? You're saying you knew there was a crisis. So when were you told of the developing problem at Manston, that people could only be held for 24 hours? There was exceptional circumstances to extend that, we understand, to a maximum of 5 days. So when were you told that the Home Office was breaching the law?
As I've said, when I first arrived at the Home Office at the beginning of September, I was incredibly aware of the pressure at
But when were you
Manston.
told you were breaching the law?
And I was putting into place, and I will invite the Permanent Secretary to confirm exactly what happened.
My question's quite specific.
Yeah.
When were you told that the Home Office was breaching the law around detaining people for more than
We'll get
24
to that point,
days?
but I need to tell you what I did in September and what I knew. That's what I'm
When-
trying to
Well,
do.
we just need the
we're
date.
asking
When
you.
were you told? You started as Home Secretary. How many days later were you told about the problem? Was it day one?
I would really
Did the
like to
Permanent
finish my
Secretary-
answer.
Tell us, when were you
But I'm
told?
trying to tell you what I knew and what I did
Okay, well, please
when I
tell us
first was
then.
appointed as Home Secretary.
Okay.
Right. So when I arrived at the beginning of September at the Home
Right.
Office, I was very much aware that there were very high levels of numbers coming in to
Yes.
Dover. I was
Okay.
very aware
Yeah.
that there's an acute need to source accommodation urgently and quickly. And that's why, during the month of September, we brought on many hotels and many beds.
With the greatest respect, my specific question to you is, when did your officials tell you that there was the developing problem at Manston and that you were breaching the law?
Right. Well, I will answer that in a
Please
straightforward way, and
do.
I'll have to repeat myself. I was aware from the beginning of my tenure that there was a problem at Manston. When it comes to legal advice, which you're asking specifically about, it is a government convention that we don't talk about the issuance or the content of legal advice. But what I will say is that in every decision that I've made, both as Home Secretary and as generally a minister, and I say this as a former Attorney General, I have always, whenever I've been provided with legal advice by officials, I've always taken it into account, read it, listened to it when it's been delivered to me orally, and borne it in mind when decisions have to be made.
Okay.
If you're suggesting that I either wasn't told about legal advice
I'm not
or I
suggesting
deliberately
anything.
ignored it, that is simply not true.
I'm not
But
suggesting anything.
I cannot, for convention reasons, and also because we are facing
Okay.
legal challenge, get into the specifics about what legal advice and when was given.
Right, so...
And can I just invite the Permanent Secretary to add anything that he might want to add about what happened?
I can confirm, Chair, that what the Home Secretary said is accurate, that the Home Office officials made the Home Secretary aware of the legal
Right.
position as well as policy options from the beginning of her tenure.
Right, thank you. I want to put to you this then. It's reported that on the 15th of September you were informed about the deepening problem at Manston and that you were likely to be in breach of the law. That was the 15th of September, so you'd been in post, I think, 9 days when you were given a submission to say there was a problem. Then I understand you were given a second submission on the 22nd of September saying there was a very high risk that you were in breach of the law, 50 to 70%. Then on the 1st of October, you were again told there was a very high risk that you were in breach of the law. And then on the 4th of October, again, 50 to 70% you were in breach of the law. And the advice was that the Home Office does not have power to detain while waiting for onward accommodation or welfare reasons. So are those correct? That's been in the press, leaked documents from the Home Office.
Well, I'm afraid I'm not going to comment on leaks, and I'm not going to comment on the specifics of legal advice,
Okay.
whether the fact or the content of it. That's not how government works.
So the judicial review that have been launched already, I'm assuming these papers will all have to be made available for the judicial review. So we will know whether what I've just read out to you is correct.
We will fulfil our duty of candour, and we will make sure that the courts receive the relevant papers.
Okay, can I just ask a question? In the letter you wrote to me, Home Secretary, about your reason that you resigned in October.
Madam Chair, can I just finish off one point, because I think it's important that I need to explain, because I haven't really had a chance to fully explain in response to that. Can I, very briefly, if I may. So, of course, I'm very aware of legal duties to accommodate incoming migrants, their welfare, their safety. That is an important duty, and there are restrictions on the power of the government to detain people or carry out checks. I have also competing duties. I have duties to ensure that people don't become destitute. So releasing people to no fixed abode or to no address is not something that I'm willing to do. I have duties to the local community where Manston is. I'm not willing to put in jeopardy people living in the local community with, migrants with no accommodation or no place to stay. That would not be a prudent use of powers or duties for the local community. There are lots of competing and challenging interests here in that decision. It is not a straightforward,
But the Home Office lawyers on the 4th of October told you that the Home Office does not have power to detain while waiting for onward accommodation and welfare reasons. That's the specific advice that we understand you were given on the 4th of October. Can I just ask you then about this meeting on the 19th of October? This was the date you resigned. And in the letter to me, you say that as part of your meetings that morning, you had a critical operational meeting about the developing situation at Manston. Can you just explain what was that meeting about?
Well, I don't want to go into too much detail about private government matters, but that does reflect the fact that, I was very aware of the developing situation at Manston. We were having almost daily meetings with Dan, with General Stuart Skeets, who I'd put in place earlier in the month to deal with the crisis, as I defined it, at Manston, to put up emergency accommodation, to provide shelter for people coming in.
Were you told again at that meeting that you were in breach of the law?
I'm not going to comment, as I said, on the content of legal advice that I may or may not have been given.
Thank you. Okay, could I ask the Permanent Secretary, when did your officials notify the Home Secretary that there was no respectable legal argument to justify the situation at Manston?
Well, without commenting on leaked documents, I can confirm that the Home Office legal advice has been flowing freely to the Home Secretary throughout this time, and indeed to her predecessor and predecessors, and that, of course, will continue.
Okay, because obviously the next day we have a new Home Secretary, and that Home Secretary says that the Home Office was in danger of breaching the law, and he took immediate action to rectify the situation. And he talked about the no respectable legal argument. That's the Home Secretary.
And what's
you
your
said
question?
that. This is to the Permanent Secretary.
Right.
So by the 20th, the legal advice had changed?
No, the legal advice has been consistent, and I can confirm that this Home Secretary and other Home Secretaries have been aware of that advice and have taken it into account in their decisions.
Oh, so just so I'm clear then, so you're saying it was the same legal advice to this Home Secretary in her first tenure and then to Grant Shapps when he took up tenure as Home Secretary?
Well, the law didn't change. I mean, some circumstances would have changed that would have meant that updated legal advice would be needed. But I mean, the essence of the legal advice would not have changed because it's based on founding principles.
Okay. And just finally, I just wanted to ask you, Home Secretary. I know you've explained that you came into post and you were faced with this issue around Manston and the numbers coming across on the small boats. Could you just say to me, could you just tell the committee, how did the Home Office get itself into this mess with up to 4,000 people being detained at Manston? Who, as Home Secretary, obviously you carry the can for this, so is it your responsibility? Is it a previous Home Secretary? Is it Grant Shapps for his short tenure as Home Secretary? Whose fault is it that we had this crisis?
Well, I think that's a fair question. I'm not going to point the finger of blame at any one person. It's not as simple as that. As I've been clear, I arrived in full awareness that there was a growing problem at Manston with the numbers arriving. That's combined with very limited housing stock which is available to people to transfer them on from Manston. We've had, we worked incredibly quickly and intensively during the month of September and October and ever since to procure extra accommodation. And since the 6th of September, over 100 new hotels providing 9,000 additional bed spaces have been brought into use. We had high levels coming in. We have been aided by the fact, as Dan says, by very low levels of people arriving, and that's given us a brief.
It's not your fault.
Listen, I don't think I don't think it's helpful to point the finger of fault at anyone.
Just
this is a bigger
problem.
problem. I'll tell you who's at fault.
Yeah.
It's very clear who's at fault. It's the people who are breaking our rules, coming here illegally, exploiting vulnerable people, and trying to abuse the generosity of the British people. That's who's at fault.
But as Home Secretary, in terms of making the system work and the processing centre at Manston, there was clearly a big problem. So I'm just trying to work out who was responsible for not foreseeing that problem, not dealing with that problem. Who was it? Were you responsible?
Well, as the Home Secretary, I do take the responsibility ultimately for the performance of the Home Office. That is my job and that is my responsibility. But I'm very clear at who's at fault. It's the people coming here illegally, people smugglers, people who are choosing to take an illegal and dangerous journey to come here for economic reasons. They should not be doing that. And that's who's at fault here. We are responding to a problem caused by other people.
I hear that.
We are procuring as fast as possible within our resources and our capacity to identify that accommodation.
But the process, that's what I'm interested in. The Home Office process did not work, it failed. So I'm just trying to work out why that was and who was responsible. Because these numbers were foreseeable. Hotels were available. Why did you end up with a position of 4,000 people at Manston?
I think I've said everything I need to say, that we had a confluence of unprecedented numbers here. We've worked intensively to procure extra accommodation. I put in place General Stuart Skeets in October to help us grip the situation and operationalise it. He's worked very closely with Dan and other colleagues at Border Force to improve the capacity at Manston. And thankfully, largely because of that very intensive effort that I oversaw, but also because of zero inflow, we've been able to get the numbers down to zero.
Okay, but there was still a major crisis at the site. Okay, Tim Lawton.
Thank you, Chair. Home Secretary, welcome to the committee. We're a very friendly committee, really.
Of course.
Can I ask you one general question, and then I want to go into the recent increase in numbers coming across the channel. Just do a bit of role play. I'm a 16-year-old orphan from an East African country escaping a war zone and religious persecution. And I have a sibling legally in the United Kingdom at the moment. What is a safe and legal route for me to come to the United Kingdom?
Well, we have... you're fleeing which country, sorry?
Any African country.
Any African country. Well...
Be any continent, but let's say any African country. I don't want to name one because then their Prime Minister might have a go at me for demonising their population. So let's just theoretically talk about an African country which is going through a period of turbulence and which is persecuting its citizens, including an innocent 16-year-old like me.
Well, we have an asylum system, and people can put in applications for asylum.
How would I do that?
Well, you can do it through the safe and legal routes that we have. We have offered 390,000 places to people seeking safety from various countries around the world.
Well, I'm not Syrian, I'm not Afghan, I'm not Ukrainian, not any of those specific schemes. The Dub scheme is historic. What scheme's open to me?
Well, if you are able to get to the UK, you are able to put in an application for asylum.
But I would only enter the UK illegally then, wouldn't I?
Well, that would, if you put in your application for asylum upon arrival, that would be the process that you enter.
How could I arrive in the UK if I didn't have permission to get onto an aircraft legally to arrive in the UK?
Let me just invite other colleagues if there's anything they want to add.
I mean, you could engage with UNHCR. I mean, depending which country you're from, you could engage with UNHCR, and that would be a way of getting leave to enter the UK in order to put in an asylum claim. But I accept that there are some countries where that would not be possible.
I think the point is that there's a shortage of safe and legal routes other than for specific groups of people that we have generously offered safe haven to. But let me come on to the recent increase in numbers coming across the channel. You've said it's unprecedented, 40,000 people come across the channel trying to enter the UK clandestinely in that way. Almost a third have come from Albania, and that figure of over 12,000 now is up from just 52 years ago. Why do you think they are trying to come to the United Kingdom?
Well, I think I should say at the outset that we do value our relationship with Albania and the Albanian community in the United Kingdom, and we continue to welcome those Albanians who travel to the UK legally and who contribute significantly to British society. We are seeing, as you say, large numbers of Albanian, largely men, risking their lives, making this dangerous journey to come here through illegal means. Your question is why? I might ask Dan, because he is literally on the front line and he is dealing with many people coming through firsthand. We've seen a variety of claims made by Albanians. We see a lot of them making modern slavery claims, claiming to have been victims of trafficking. We see a lot of Albanian people making asylum claims, despite the fact that Albania is not a country in conflict or in war. I think I've seen some journalism recently that has identified Albanian people who have come and who have, of their own admission, said that they are coming for economic reasons. So I think there's a mixture of reasons as to why.
But none of those are reasons why they need to come to the UK rather than another safe country if Albania is not a safe country, which we think it is, and EU countries think it is. So how come we have over 12,000 Albanian citizens applying for asylum in most cases, or being victims of so-called modern slavery in others, and yet Germany and Sweden, for example, will not recognise any asylum claims from Albania? Why are we not following suit?
Yep. Well, I think that, so Albanian nationals have been one of the nationalities most frequently referred to the National Referral Mechanism.
The most frequently, in fact.
Yes, absolutely, since it was established in 2014. And they are the most common nationality referred, which is continuing that trend. You've asked why are we not dealing with Albanians in the same way as other European counterparts. I think there are a mixture of reasons when we make international comparisons, and it's not necessarily straightforward as saying, well, Germany presumes Albania, it doesn't accept asylum claims from Albania. They might have just a higher threshold or a...
It doesn't. It doesn't recognise asylum claims from Albania, nor does Sweden. So why are we so different from those two countries that we are entertaining over 12,000 people, most of which have got asylum claims from a stable country?
If I may, I mean, one of the really important things to say about Germany and other countries like that is, of course, they're in the Schengen area, and there are land borders between Albania and those countries. So it certainly wouldn't be true to say that there aren't a lot of Albanian people working illegally in those countries, albeit the asylum grant rate is very low. I think the difference between that and the small boats phenomenon is that we have a very large number of people turning up at one location in Dover, who are then, because of the level of control we have over those arrivals, are then forced to make a decision about whether they claim asylum or not. The grant rate for asylum for Albanian males is actually very low in the UK. It's about 12%. So certainly, if you look at it in the round, including families and that sort of thing, it is higher. But it's certainly not true to say that there isn't a similar problem. And the Home Secretary is absolutely right, because of the issue with the national referral mechanism scheme and the way that it's being exploited. That is an incentive for Albanians.
I understand. We treat Albanians coming here differently to other countries. The overwhelming of the migration system recently, and particularly the impact on Manston, I think we are all agreed, is largely due to the very large increase in a short space of time of a group of Albanians. So if the acceptance rate is so low, and we do accept asylum claims, how many Albanians have been removed to Albania out of those 12,000 plus who've come this year, 800 last year, 50 the year before? How many applications for victims of modern slavery have been accepted? And of those that have been accepted, how many have been removed back to Albania, having recognised their claims of being victims of modern slavery, which does not require us to act then as host in the United Kingdom to those people?
So I can give you some of those numbers. So there have been 1,000 Albanians returned to Albania who are foreign national offenders and the like since the agreement that we signed with Albania last year.
National offenders and the like, how many of those are not national offenders? I'm only concerned about people coming over here without criminal records.
Of the cohort of Albanians that have come through Manston, in the last few weeks we've removed 36 of those directly back to Albania. And you may have read the interview with one of them in the BBC this week, which I thought was very compelling. There have been 2,916 Albanian referrals to the NRM to August 2022 this year, which will include all of those arriving by small boat.
Okay, so the point, come back to you, Home Secretary, a very large portion of Albanians who have a very low success rate on asylum claims and who may have a higher success rate on modern slavery claims but do not require to be kept in the United Kingdom. Indeed, a case could be made that they are safer back amongst friends and family and being protected by their own government rather than subject to people traffickers and the slavers in the United Kingdom who are controlling them. A very small portion have actually been removed. We have a special arrangement with Albania set up by the previous Home Secretary last year. What has that actually achieved? How many Albanian officials from the police or their equivalent of border force are currently stationed in the United Kingdom and aiding in the speedy removal of Albanians? And what measures are you taking to fast-track Albanians on the basis that we all, I think, recognise that they aren't, in most cases, genuine asylum seekers who need to be kept in the United Kingdom? Multitude of questions there, but
yes,
I'm sure
a lot of questions there. Well, I think that I think this is part of the problem that we're trying to fix. There's a high number of people coming from Albania making asylum claims and making modern slavery claims, and the reality is that our legal framework is allowing those claims to be made and then processed. And you can really see that when it comes to modern slavery. A few years ago, it would take on average approximately 40 days before a decision would be made on modern slavery grounds. And now, because the system has been overwhelmed, largely by people coming here illegally on small boats, it's now taking over 400 days. So, and the law in our Modern Slavery Act obliges the state to carry out an assessment of someone's modern slavery claim. So that is one of the challenges that we are facing legally. A very high number of people coming here from Albania are claiming legislation, are claiming rights which are provided for in our legislation. And
what have you done about
legal duties?
This was a problem a year ago, and it was identified as a problem by your predecessor, and special arrangements were made with Albania. Since when, the number of Albanians coming here has gone up by a multiple of 15. So what have you done, and what did your predecessor do to make the situation any better, because it's got 15 times worse?
Well, there has been, in terms of what I am doing, perhaps you or Dan want to talk about the returns agreement struck with Albania and how that's actually played out.
So let me add a couple of things to what the Home Secretary said. So first of all, we have enforced the return of over 2,300 people to Albania since 2019. Just last week, we returned another 26, including some straight from Manston, as Dan was describing. We are working very closely with our colleagues from Albania, and as the Home Secretary said, we have a shared interest in preventing this sort of irregular migration into the UK.
We have a shared interest, we're working closely. What does that mean? Well, how many Albanians are here? How many Albanian officials are in this country at the moment working with the Home Office or Border Force?
We work really very closely both in the UK and in Albania with officials right from the front line up to the ministerial level. And we have an Albanian police officer who's deployed at Manston actually on the ground. My teams work very closely with the embassy in the UK.
Okay, so there's one police officer. There's one Albanian police officer at Manston, who presumably at the moment is not got much to do because it's empty. How many other Albanian police officers or Albanian officials are in the UK at the moment?
I mean, I don't have the exact number, but what I can say is
10, 101, 1,000, roughly.
We'll get an answer to you, Mr. Lawton, but what I can speak to is the extremely high level of very constructive operational cooperation with Albania. A key
feature announced by the previous Home Secretary was that we would be working very closely with the Albanian authorities. There was a streamlined agreement to return those who had not got legitimate claims, and that officials would be boots on the ground, working alongside UK officials, co-located in order to help that process. So far we've identified one who's here. I don't believe there are any others here. Commander Amani, you know probably how many there are here because you're working with all these people. There aren't any more here, are there? There's one at Manston and that's it.
Sorry, I don't agree with that, Mr. Lawton. I don't know the exact number, but I know that my team are meeting with officials from the embassy and from the
I'm not
Albanian
talking about diplomats. I'm talking about border officials and police officials specifically posted over here, as announced by our previous Home Secretary last year, as a beefed-up measure to deal with the immediate and growing problem of Albanians coming here without due process.
I think the important thing from my point of view is the operational impact of what we're doing. So there is live data exchange going on between the UK and teams in Tirana on Albanians who arrive in the UK, both on their documents and progressing to taking their biometric details to see if they have criminal records in Albania. That is a very, very impactful move. And we have a police officer deployed in Manston who is helping us with the cultural awareness and the understanding of exactly who these people are and what their likely intentions are. The operational impact of that is really significant. And I think that giving you a number probably underplays that really significantly because particularly when we look at the cooperation.
There are others who want to come in. Can you answer the specific question of how many Albanians who've had a claim processed, and I realise there are many still in the system, for modern-day slavery, have had that claim upheld, but they have been located back to Albania because it's been deemed safe to do that? Have any actually been relocated back to Albania after that claim has been determined in that way?
So I look into the number of Albania returns, and the total number of people that we returned to Albania since November 2021 is 1,435. That's the number that I've been given here. But what I would say in answer to your question as to why notwithstanding our agreement with Albania, we are still finding it difficult. That number is very small compared to the number of people actually arriving here. Why is that? Why are we not able to return more pursuant to our agreement? The reason is that if someone from Albania has a legal claim pending, whether it be modern slavery or asylum, that trumps any agreement we may have with Albania, and that puts a pause.
That. It was a specific question. Have anybody with modern slavery claims been returned to Albania? I believe the number is 0. If that's wrong, will you please write to us to tell us? Because your officials confirmed, when Commander Mani was here in a recent session, that determination of a modern-day slavery claim is not then leading to a mandatory grant of leave to remain in the United Kingdom, and there are reasons why they could be more safely then protected by being returned to Albania, and I would hope that part of the agreement would facilitate that. Perhaps if we could be told if that is happening, because I suspect it's not. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Diane Abbott.
Thank you very much, Chair. I wanted to ask the Home Secretary about the Migration and Economic Development Programme agreement with Rwanda, which was announced earlier this year. We know that you've been quoted as saying, I would love to have the front page of the Telegraph with a plane taking off to Rwanda. That is my dream, it's my obsession. Do you know what happened when Israel tried this?
Well, I mean, we can always look to international comparisons, and I think it's a very mixed picture when you look at how different countries have tried to deal with the complex challenge of illegal migration. So if you're asking about what my view is of our agreement with Rwanda, I'm very committed to it.
Do you know what happened when Israel did this? Because this is your dream, this is your obsession. I would have thought that you would have looked into what happened when other countries tried to do it.
Well, I do know that Israel, I don't know the details, but I do know that Israel had some kind of arrangement with Rwanda. It was tentative, but it didn't ultimately work. I also know that other countries have had more successful analogous experiences. If you look at Australia, for example, they did have a very multifaceted approach to their challenge with their illegal migration, and when they were able to start removing people to another different part of the territory, they that was a partial factor in their ability to combat the problem. So I think there's a very mixed picture if you look at international examples. What I'm focused on is our UK experience. I think that the agreement that the UK struck with Rwanda is groundbreaking. It is in both our countries' interests. It is something that it will take us forward. We are currently engaged in litigation on the issue, but I'm very confident that we will be able to operationalise it as soon as possible.
You said that Israel only sent a few people.
No, I didn't say that. No, I said ultimately I don't think.
Was sent?
Sorry?
How many people do you think Israel sent?
I don't know the exact figures.
All right. Well, the Israeli scheme was between 2014 to 2017. They sent thousands of people over there. But when Israeli researchers went to Rwanda in 2018, what they found was of those thousands of people, only 7 remained. So it wasn't very successful, was it, Home Secretary?
Well, I've been upfront, and this is anything you want to say, but I note the Israeli example. It's, I don't think that necessarily has to dictate what the UK experience will be. This is a different agreement. This is in a different set of circumstances. And we have been very clear that we are confident about the terms of our agreement with Rwanda, and I'm very confident about the effect that it will have.
And can I ask you, are you also confident that Rwanda is a safe country to send people to?
Well, I have actually visited Rwanda twice, quite a while ago, around 2010, 2009, and I've always found Rwanda to be a very inspiring country. Actually, we would only ever work with countries that we assess to be safe and that we assess will treat asylum seekers in accordance with relevant human rights law. And our own safety assessment of Rwanda and their asylum process has found that it is fundamentally a safe and secure country with a track record of supporting asylum seekers. So, and that is reflected in our country policy information note, which is published on our government website.
Are you aware, Home Secretary, that Human Rights Watch and the US State Department, which is scarcely somebody who you can ignore, they have said that the things that single Rwanda out is arbitrary detention, ill treatment, torture in official and unofficial detention, which is commonplace, and fair trial standards are routinely flouted. Are you saying the US State Department is wrong?
Well, Rwanda, I mean, the facts are that Rwanda already hosts hundreds of thousands of refugees from the region.
Are you saying that the US State Department is wrong?
Well, our evidence and our view and our assessment of the safety and security of Rwanda is different. We say, looking at Rwanda's track record and our assessments, that actually, as I say, Rwanda already hosts is a safe and secure country with a track record of supporting over 130,000 refugees, including through the UN Refugee Agency, who they themselves said the country has a safe and protective environment for refugees. So we would only work with countries who have a safe and secure basis for accommodating asylum seekers. And there's nothing in the UN Refugee Convention which prevents removal to a safe country.
So you are dismissing Human Rights Watch and the US State Department. I'm just trying to get it clear. You're dismissing what they have to say.
I haven't seen their documents and their views, so I don't really want to comment specifically on the content.
You should have, before you became Home Secretary, in saying that you 100% supported the scheme.
Well, I do support the scheme. There has been rigorous investigation into the arrangements and the conditions in Rwanda. Rwanda will process claims in accordance with its international obligations under the UN Refugee Convention. It will ensure protection from inhumane and degrading treatment. As I say, it has already and is already a safe and secure country for refugees from the region, and it hosts the EU-funded UNHCR emergency transit mechanism. So I don't think those are institutions that would use Rwanda for those purposes if there were serious doubts about its viability.
And are you confident that you can send migrants there who are unwilling to go?
Well, the policy that we have put in place when it comes to Rwanda is that they will be moved there and their asylum claim will be determined in Rwanda.
I understand the policy you put in place. I'm asking you something quite specific. Are you confident that you can send migrants there if they are unwilling to go?
Yes.
And you're aware that in the when the Israelis tried this in 2017, the Israeli Supreme Court struck it all down, saying you simply could not send people unwillingly. I accept that's the Israeli Supreme Court, but it's not irrelevant to what you're trying to do. So you're telling this committee that you're completely confident that you can send migrants to Rwanda unwillingly. I just want it on the record.
Listen, it's not for me to comment on the rights or wrongs of another sovereign nation's laws and arrangements. And I respect the Israeli court decision and their arrangements.
Do that, Home Secretary. In a sense, you're diverting from my question. Are you able to go on the record in front of this committee and say that you can send migrants to Rwanda if they are not willing to go?
Well, I mean, the whole purpose of the scheme that we've set up with Rwanda is to send people there who have arrived here illegally for their asylum claims to be processed. Whether they are willing or unwilling, they will either put in a legal claim and that will be upheld, or it will be dismissed. And that's the basis upon which, if we have the legal basis to do so, we will deliver the Rwanda scheme as fully as possible.
There are many other members that want to put questions. I'm just going to ask you for the last time, are you confident that you can legally send migrants to Rwanda who are unwilling to go?
What I would say is, I mean, we are in the process of litigation at the moment. There are live legal questions which are going to be resolved by a court. Let's wait to see what the court says and what the outcome of litigation is. It wouldn't be, we've made our position very clear in court. We have confidence in the Rwanda scheme, and if we are successful in litigation, then we will be delivering the Rwanda scheme at pace.
Thank you. Just before I come to Stuart MacDonald, perhaps the Permanent Secretary might be able to tell us whether he is now satisfied of the value for money of the Rwanda scheme, because he obviously got a ministerial direction on the point of value for money. We understand another £20 million has been spent, so perhaps you're able to confirm whether you've now reached a conclusion on that or not?
Well, I keep that judgment under constant review, as you would expect, and the circumstances have not changed sufficiently for me to change my judgment, which from April, as you will recall, was that we did not have evidence that it would be value for money, which is not the same thing as saying it will not be value for money. It was just we were waiting to see what the evidence would be. As you have said, the UK has paid 120 million plus now an additional 20 million for set-up costs to the government of Rwanda, and it remains the case that it could be value for money, and it could not be. I will repeat my commitment to this committee and to your sister committee, the Public Accounts Committee, to update you when the circumstances change to require me to change that assessment.
Oh, we'll look forward to that. Okay.
But I think it is worth underlining that the purpose of the scheme is deterrence. It's prevention. The success of the scheme will not be measured in how many thousands of people are relocated to Rwanda, but more in how many thousands of people do not make the dangerous crossing of the channel, putting their own and other people's lives at risk. That is the key metric to determine on value for money whether this scheme is successful or not.
And clearly the numbers have been going up this year since the announcement. Stuart MacDonald.
Thank you and welcome everybody. I want to talk about children in the asylum system, but first of all just a couple of quick factual follow-ups from earlier discussions. When we visited Manston on the 8th of November, my notes tell me that there were at that stage 1,292 people there. Does that sound about right? Okay. So would it be possible for you then to write to the committee with details about how many people were in Manston each day, say from about the middle of August? That would be very helpful, because it has been a frustration that parliamentary questions from myself and from my colleagues haven't been answered, so if you can do that, that would be very helpful indeed. Secondly, Mr Romani, so you were speaking a little bit about the exceptional circumstances that justified extended detention earlier on. Again, my recollection from a visit was that we were essentially told that that process had been abandoned for a certain period. So were you saying that these were the exceptional circumstances that justified really abandoning that policy, or are you saying there was a decision made on every individual case to extend their detention and reasons were noted down and authority sought from the appropriate level of officer?
I'm not commenting on the legal advice or the legal status for the reasons that the Home Secretary has already outlined. So what I was illustrating were the choices that we were having to make. The choice about people staying there for longer than 24 hours versus essentially making
so
the best.
I appreciate there was a call to be made, though I might dispute the extent to which there's a tension between those two duties. I'm just asking, as a matter of fact, where the Home Office in a position whereby essentially had to stop going through that process and just to say, well, people are going to have to stay here for 20 days, 30 days, however long it takes us to find accommodation. I don't know if you can comment, Mr Rycroft. Is there a paper trail? Would I be able to see paper saying in each of these cases I have sought authority from the appropriate level of officer to extend detention. My understanding from our visit was that was just abandoned because it was impractical.
I'm going to have to go away and look at that because I wasn't aware that you were told that during the visit, so I'll have to check the audit trail and I can write.
I might have picked it up wrong, but it'd be useful just to have clarity in that. Thirdly, just in relation to Albanians, obviously there is an issue, but in terms of context, I think I'm right in saying that the latest figures are 55% of Albanian asylum claims are accepted. Obviously there's a huge disparity between men and women. Yeah. Also, so we've spoken about the modern slavery system as well. So, I mean, it's the Home Office itself that refers people into the national referral mechanism. So it's not as if people can make spurious claims and somehow enter that system. 97% of those claims are accepted. And what is it that Home Office guidance says about conditions for victims of trafficking in Albania and how Albania lives up to its obligations under international conventions? I don't know if you can comment on that, Mr. Rycroft.
Well, I think it is fair to say that we do have evidence that the system is subject to abuse, because you can see that the time at which in an individual's process when they make the claim to be a victim of modern slavery, and very regularly it is only at the point when their asylum claim would otherwise be refused.
Yeah, but there could be a whole host of reasons for that. I mean, it's well established that victims of modern slavery will take a long time to disclose these things, and I mean, who on earth is aware of the modern slavery legislation when they first arrive in the country? So it's not as simple as saying they made that claim at the end of their time here. You're still accepting that 97% of them are actually victims of modern slavery.
Well, as the Home Secretary was discussing with Mr. Loughton earlier, I mean, the big difference in the UK's system and, say, Germany's is the national referral mechanism. The Modern Slavery Act is very victim-focused and gives very significant rights to victims, and that is good for genuine victims, but it does mean that it is open.
97% are accepted as genuine victims. 97%. Correct.
I don't recognise that figure, but it is definitely open to abuse, and so the government is looking at ways to address
provide
that
the evidence
abuse.
then, because that's what folk are asking for. I mean, the last trafficking commissioner that was in post was still waiting for a reappointment, says no evidence of this. So provide the evidence. And you can come back to me if you think my 97%.
If I may just add something as well about what we've learned from the practical experience, is that I think the grant rate is high. We can get back to you on the specific number, but
it's a recognition rate, because as Mr. Lawton says,
conclusive grounds rate, the final decision on the claim for slavery is high. But what I would also say is, I think there is evidence of abuse. It's not just in this cohort.
I've heard that, but I want to see it.
I'll also give you some examples. I mean, we also see it when it comes to foreign national offenders. People who've been incarcerated after serving sentences for committing very serious crimes, and after many years on the point of removal, it's interesting that they suddenly remember that they're now a victim of modern slavery. I perceive that, and you are a fellow immigration lawyer as well in your past life. I do see that as an abuse, I'm afraid.
So, I'll listen to you when you're able to show me that these people were aware of their right to claim to be victims of modern slavery earlier on in their sentence, and then we may be able to agree on that. But anyway, I want to turn to children because I'm using up all my time on supplementary questions. So I think we'd all agree on the importance of deciding who is a child is very, very important. There is obviously a Refugee Council report that suggested 94% of a cohort that they worked with successfully challenged Home Office assertions that children were adults. Various other reports don't have as high a figure as that, but there's certainly a big suggestion that the Home Office gets this wrong far too often. The problem I have is that the Home Office doesn't seem to follow through and record what exactly happens with age assessments that are challenged. What's your view on that, Home Secretary? I think there's more we can do in terms of gathering data. Surely we could agree on that.
Well, I have been interested in the age assessment processes when it comes to asylum-seeking children. So typically, the UK receives over 3,000 asylum claims from unaccompanied asylum-seeking children every year. Between 2016 and 2021, there were over 6,000 cases where age was disputed and subsequently resolved, with 58% found to be adults. I consider that to be quite a high
Yes,
proportion
but that's,
of people claiming to be children and subsequently being found to be
No,
adults.
of course it is. But my problem is, that, as I understand it, that figure says it's 58% that the Home Office decide are adults. And then actually when you go through the challenge, we don't know how many end up actually being found to be children because you don't take a central note of that. So from that cohort of the Refugee Council, 94% of those that you have deemed to be adults actually are children. Others, as I say, don't have as high a figure as that, but you don't have any record of that. You just assert the Home Office has decided that 50-odd% are adults, and that's all you know. Mr Rycroft, am I wrong?
Well, we're changing that system, and the Nationality Borders Act brought in a new approach of a National Age Assessment Board, which, when after commencement of those provisions of that Act, will consist of expert social workers whose task will be to conduct age assessments after a local authority refers.
Just vital for our ability to know whether or not the Home Office is getting this right, that you guys, so you say 58% of these folk we think are adults, but then you also need
But it's not just someone just sort of plucking a judgment out of the air. There is a process that has gone through with expertise embedded in it.
I have concerns about that process. We'll come to them in a little second. But you don't record what actually happens. That 58% of them, 94% in that particular cohort were eventually found to be children. Surely we can at least agree that you should have a central database of that, so we can assess whether the Home Office is doing its job properly. I just ask you to look at that. Surely that's something we agree would be useful to know. Are the Home Office assertions that people are adults actually standing up to scrutiny? That suggests absolutely not. So surely, if you want to combat my view, you have to say, no, that's not right, because we have followed this through, and actually the Home Office decisions have been upheld in 80% of cases.
Well, it comes down to, as the Permanent Secretary was saying, the rules that are being applied at facilities like Manston. When people arrive, they claim to be a child, they go through some checks. Yes. Those checks ultimately are resulting in 58% of them not being to be well-founded claims to be children. The Nationality and Borders Act does bring in new guidance, a more rigorous approach to age assessment.
That's according to 2 border guards who speak to them for 40 minutes. I have to say I was not impressed with that aspect of Manston's law. I perfectly understand at Manston, but I wasn't impressed by that. Have you investigated the claims that children arriving at Manston were pressured into saying that they were, or encouraged to say that they were adults so that they would go to hotels? That again comes from the Refugee Council with a recording of a conversation with an immigration officer.
No, I haven't heard. I don't recognise that there's encouragement by officials to make particular claims. What I do know in terms of the data is the breakdown by age of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. The vast majority of unaccompanied asylum children are 16 or 17 years old. That 90% of them are male. That I just offer that as for factual context.
Yeah, but back to my questions. Mr Rycroft, has anything happened as a result of those allegations? Was there an investigation or any guidance issued?
I'll have to chat that specific question, Mr MacDonald, but what I can say is that clearly there are some incentives for some people who are actually adults to claim to be children, and there are other incentives for other people who are actually children to claim to be adults, and we want to reduce both of those.
Is it your policy at the moment to be placing age-disputed children into hotels?
Well, our policy is that people who claim to be children, we have a responsibility for them, and ideally, our aim is for children and unaccompanied asylum-seeking children to be placed through local authorities into foster care. Unfortunately, there is a national shortfall of available foster care placements, and therefore we do have to put as a default option unaccompanied asylum-seeking children into hotels. They are, when they are in those hotels, supported by team leaders, support workers, social workers, and we try and pack a lot of support for these children.
People just seem to be struggling to understand what it is they're supposed to do. So, for example, if a security guard is spoken to by somebody at a hotel, or migrant help get a call from somebody who's at a hotel and they say, I am a child, and so NGOs and these people seem to not be absolutely clear what it is that's supposed to happen at that stage.
But if they are children, as the Home Secretary said, there is a very significant amount of wraparound support that is available, including education, health, safeguarding, and other expertise from people whose full-time job it is to provide that support.
If somebody hasn't been able to access that, then who do they contact?
Well, they have a right to access that, and they should access that, and I think that their route to ensure they are accessing that would be through migrant help, I think, but it would depend on the precise circumstances, the particular local authority they were in, and so on.
Is there a specific safeguarding policy for children?
Yes.
Okay. And what does it say in relation to who children can share with in hotels? Because I think there's quite clear rules around who can share with who in dispersal accommodation, but I can't find them in relation to hotels.
Okay, we can check that and write to you, Mr. McDonald.
Okay. And then finally, I know you can't say very much about the death at Manston, obviously, absolutely understand. But could I first of all ask what steps have been taken to support staff there, because that's all been a traumatic experience for them, also other detainees, and also seek assurances that those who may have information about what happened are being kept track of. There was an incident, obviously, where the Home Office got into trouble for removing people who might have had information relevant to an inquest, and seek reassurances that will not be happening in this case.
Sorry, I missed your second question, Mr. McDonald.
So the support, and then secondly, just assurances that anyone who might have information about what happened isn't being removed, frankly, or lost sight of, because there was an incident a couple of years ago where I think the Home Office had been the subject of some criticism for that happening.
There's a very high level of welfare support available to my officers and the contractors that work at Manston, including not on site but close to the site, counselling support and a range of other offers. So the welfare support is a strong offer. I mean, in terms of other people involved, there's an ongoing coronial inquest into the circumstances. But what I can say is, the person involved it had a significant level of medical support while he was staying at Manston, and the circumstances around what happened are not suspicious in any way. So there's no police investigation ongoing. But of course, we're very mindful of the people that he was with. The fact that, as far as I understand it, we haven't managed to contact his next of kin yet. So a tragic set of circumstances that we're continuing to handle very carefully.
Okay, thank you.
Just on that point, how long was that man who sadly died at Manston? How long was he there for?
He arrived in the UK on the 12th, and he died in the early hours of the 19th.
Okay, so he was at Manston for 7 days?
Yes.
Was the person subject to an age dispute as well, do you know? Are you able to say?
Not as far as I'm aware, no.
Thank you. Simon Fell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much to the panel for joining us. I'd just like to ask a few questions on the asylum backlog, if I may. So my understanding is that the backlog sits at around 122,000 people at the moment waiting for an initial decision. That breaks down to around 70,000 who've been waiting for a year or under, 40,000 for 1 to 3 years, and around 10,000 who've been sat in the system for 3 to 5 years. We heard from officials during our last session on this that only about 4% of applications submitted in 2021 had received a decision within 6 months. And we've got figures from the immigration minister around the number of people making those decisions, so about 1,000 caseworkers who are working through them at a case for about 2 a week. Now my maths is pretty appalling, but even I can figure out that needs about a 250% increase to maintain that backlog at its current levels. So first question is the obvious one. What's your plan to start to reduce that backlog?
Yes, well, I agree that there is the backlog is too high, and we are developing comprehensive plans to tackle and reduce the asylum backlog. There are 3 primary mechanisms that we aim to do that. Firstly, increasing the productivity of caseworkers by streamlining, digitising and simplifying the process through the delivery of our transformation programme and the PACE programme. Secondly, tackling the legacy caseload in a balanced way. And thirdly, the recruitment of new decision makers. And that asylum transformation programme aims to bring the system back into balance and to modernise it. 4% of decisions being made is far too low. The average decision, the rate of decision making is 1 decision a week per decision maker. We need to increase that, and that's why we are increasing the number of asylum caseworkers. And we've done that by 80%, from 597 staff in 2019-20 to more than 1,000 today, and we're on course for a further 500 people by March of next year, which would take our total to approximately 1,500.
Thank you for that. Can I ask, does that take into account the, I think it's 46% attrition rate you have?
No, attrition does mean that we are expecting to have approximately 1,300 caseworkers by March of next year, after attrition, yeah.
So based on that, when do you expect the backlog to start to be reduced?
Well, I mean, listen, we're working to get it reduced as quickly as possible. I can't, unfortunately, put a precise date on when we want this to be regularised, but we want to, the rollout of the PACE pilot to all Home Office sites is due to be completed by May of next year, and then we want to roll that approach to a further to 3 further operational sites, and we want to deliver sustainable changes to reach a minimum of 3 decisions per decision maker per week by May of next year. But we have an ambition to reach 4 decisions per decision maker per week. So that is the current level of ambition.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate it's difficult, but there's still a huge delta between where you are and where you need to get to. We've seen with other similar circumstances, the Home Office work quite flexibly in a situation like this. So with Ukraine, you stepped up a team from across the Home Office to process visas when you had a backlog. We had the same with the EU settlement scheme. I'm curious to understand whether you might be thinking of doing something similar here and bringing people across from other parts of the department to help work through this.
Yes, I'm still very keen to explore all options, and so. There has been mounting pressure on the asylum system for several years because of the numbers of people putting in claims. Some of those claims do have complex needs. They have safeguarding measures. They have issues to do with age assessment. Some people are very vulnerable. So if there's a modern slavery claim, it requires more resource. So those claims, because of our legal duties, need to be considered fully and robustly, and that takes time and that takes a certain level of expertise. So, but I agree, there is far too much delay in the system. It is too slow, and there are different elements within our overall visa asylum decision-making system where decisions can be made in a much quicker fashion, and I'm very keen to see what we can learn. I'm looking at how can we try and streamline using technology. How can we build on what the results of the trial which we led in Leeds resulted in, which did increase the average decision-making rate. So there are lots of things we're looking at. Yeah, I won't lie, it's not easy.
Can I just add 2 things to what the Home Secretary has said? So first of all, on the productivity of each individual caseworker, all of the facts the Home Secretary said are accurate. I would just add that the training investment is quite significant. So it's not as simple as just moving people off one scheme and onto this. It is important that people have full training in order to get up to speed, which is why overall we have dealt with the bulk of this through new recruitment. And secondly, retention is an issue. I mean, these are amongst the lowest paid civil servants in the civil service. So we have found a way of paying a retention allowance so that if people stay for a year, they get paid £1,500 more, and if they stay for 2 years or more, then they get 2,500, and that is halving the leaving rate, doubling the retention rate.
And I appreciate that, and obviously the end result of this backlog is £6.5 million spent every day on hotel accommodation, so it would seem prudent to spend money up front and get more of these cases processed as soon as you can. But just on your point, Home Secretary, about looking at what you can do to expedite decision making, there's a case for being bold here. So we've heard about the 4% that have been processed. If you look at the cohorts of people who are sat in that backlog, 35% of them, that's 43,000 people, come from 5 countries: Iran, Afghanistan, Eritrea, Sudan and Syria. Iranians have got a grant rate of around 85%. The other countries I mentioned are close to 100%. Isn't there a case to start to triage and do security checks, make sure people are who they say they are, make sure that we can trust them, and then allow them to get into the country and earn money, get out of the Home Office support system, get out of hotels? Curious as to your thoughts on that.
Well, I think the view at the moment is that we don't believe it's appropriate to prioritise claims from one nationality over another, as many claimants, irrespective of nationality, are potentially vulnerable, and no one is expected to leave the UK while they've got a claim outstanding. So claims are prioritised on the basis of current tasking within the department. The kinds of things we are looking at, however, are initiatives to reduce the time it takes to interview and decide asylum cases. Is there something around that process, which can sometimes take a very long time, that we can streamline? We're looking at trying to, as I say, double the decision-making improve the decision-making process, so there's less bureaucracy involved within the caseload of a decision maker. Those are the kinds of things that we're looking at. But I take your point that there are definitely cohorts which demonstrate particular features, but I think by identifying them by nationality wouldn't be the right way to go.
And I completely understand the need for fairness, but I think we also need to look at pragmatism here. And if you can reduce those numbers down by a third by following this path, if you follow Mr. Lawton's chain of logic, you can reduce that number down to almost half when you take Albanians out of the equation as well. That would severely reduce the strain on statutory services in our constituencies, on third sector organisations, on the hotels that are being used in the system. It would, to me, make sense to follow that path. Anyway, that is the end of my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take Caroline Harris very quickly, and then move on
it
to
is
Paul
quickly.
Barker.
Home Secretary, I wonder if you'd comment on the reports that the people being hired by the Home Office to clear the asylum processing backlog are getting just 2 days of training, and that many of them are getting their information about the countries that people are fleeing from Lonely Planet and the Rough Guide.
That's a concerning report. I'm not familiar with it, but I'm not sure if there's anything you can say about the kind of training that people are getting. But ultimately, these are really important decisions that people are making. It's important that they receive sufficient training, that they are using the appropriate guidance issued by government and verified by independent expertise when these decisions are being made. So we want to ensure that our caseworkers are properly remunerated and ensure that they have the proper resources to work productively.
And there's country guidance on every country, and that is the basis of the caseworkers' decision making.
Okay, Paula Barker.
Thanks, Chair. Home Secretary, could you talk us through the process of securing accommodation and talk us through the criteria?
Do you mean for an individual person?
No, I mean for the accommodation.
You mean for an individual person securing their accommodation? What is the process for securing a destination of accommodation for someone who comes and presents?
Yes, so what criteria is used when the Home Office secures accommodation to move people from Manston to a hotel?
Well, we look at availability. That's been a key factor for procuring accommodation. We want to ensure that people are able to be properly supported in that accommodation. Our main priority is to use dispersed accommodation through local authorities, and we provide a lot of funding to make sure that eligible local authorities can provide the wraparound support locally. More than £21 million has been provided in unring-fenced grant funding to those local authorities, and local authorities will also receive £3,500 for each new accommodation bed that they provide through dispersal accommodation in this financial year. So that's our main priority. We want to ideally not use hotels and go through the local authorities to identify properties that way.
So on the 20th of November, I received an email from Asylum Support Bronze Command to advise me that a hotel in my constituency was going to be stood up within 24 hours. The problem with that is the site is not a hotel. It hasn't been for over 17 years. It is derelict. When I have gone back and asked a series of questions, which I believe to be relatively easy questions, such as any planning or change of use applications that have been made to the local authority, number of proposed asylum seekers for the property, details of the proposed asylum seekers in terms of the demographics, so women, men, children, families, any relevant risk assessments regarding location, profile of people being placed there, checks made for human habitation on the property, fire safety, gas safety, special requirements including overcrowding and bathroom facilities, sanitation, length of time that they will be held there, and information on how you intend to support people in the accommodation with meals, healthcare, security, finances, etc. I was told that that information was complex and was not readily available, and they couldn't meet the deadline of 24 hours that I'd set, and it may take 72 hours. Do you think that's reasonable, that that information is not readily available?
Well, so I don't know the particular circumstances of what's happened in this case, but what I will say is that I am aware of real concerns about the procurement of hotels. So, as I've said, our main priority is to try to get asylum seekers accommodated through local authority housing. And when we can't do that, we are using hotels. And that is a short-term solution to meet our immediate and acute need. We've also been, we have providers who are tasked with identifying suitable options to ensure that these hotels are made available. You just asked me about the criteria, and I've got the detailed criteria here. Regarding the hotels, we source the suitable accommodation within the broad principles of the standards, so they need to be of a suitable contractual requirement. The availability, we generally are using them on an exclusive use basis. They need to be suitable, and that includes the impacts on the local community, the local availability of local services, community cohesion, feedback from local partners, and affordability and value for money are also a criteria within this process. And once a site is identified as potentially viable, providers, the contractors with whom we work are given the approval to begin a due diligence and engagement with the hotel, and the Home Office then begins its engagement activity with local partners, including notice to the local authority, chief executive and the Member of Parliament. We are instituting this new process because I am aware that it hasn't been sufficient.
Given this particular site has not been a hotel for over 17 years and is derelict. Do you think that your due diligence is working?
Right, well, I don't know if there's anything you know about this particular matter, but as I say, that does, on the face of what you're telling me, sound concerning. It doesn't sound as if a derelict, I mean, of course, and again, without knowing all the facts, a derelict piece of accommodation would not be suitable accommodation for asylum seekers or anybody for that fact. So I don't know what's happened there, if I'm honest. I don't know if there's anything you can add.
I don't know about that specific case, Home Secretary, but we will follow up with you to make sure that the engagement that the Home Secretary was talking about and the new system which we've set up as of this week, I hope you've seen the letter from the Minister for Immigration to all MPs that sets out that process, that engagement includes answers to all of your questions. And obviously, if there's been such a important misunderstanding as the one that you described, then clearly, that something has gone wrong in the process.
I think a misunderstanding is an understatement, Mr. Rycroft, if you don't mind me saying. Interestingly, the local authority chief executive was advised that that particular accommodation is now not going to be used. I have yet to have the courtesy of that being sent to me officially. I'd like to concentrate on the geographical spread, because information that I have, which has been taken from the House of Commons Library in December 2021. And this is specifically only looking at Section 95 of asylum support. So it's only a proportion of immigration as a whole. The total number in the North West was 11,544, which is around 20% of all placed asylum seekers, and that gives a ratio of 15 asylum seekers per 10,000 of population. In comparison, the South East and South West have a combined amount of 5,696 asylum seekers, which accounts for around 6% of all those placed in the country, and a ratio of 2 per 10,000 of population in both regions. Is there any reason why local authorities in areas that have been hit harder by austerity and are already, one could describe as areas of deprivation, are being used predominantly over the more leafy shires, for example?
Well, I think you raise a very important point, actually, and I've been concerned for some time about the disparity in the distribution of hotels, and if we focus on hotels for now, but actually you could say the same for generally speaking asylum accommodation. And the point that you make for your local area, I think you could make in relation to different areas around the country. There are some local authorities who have a very high concentration of hotels or asylum seekers in their vicinity, and there are some local authorities who are housing zero asylum seekers. Now, I've become aware of this. I don't think that, I'm not sure, I don't understand the reason for that unequal distribution. And I know ultimately it is, we have contractors who identify the hotels and actually procure them. The Immigration Minister has been recently liaising very closely with these contracting companies to probe more closely as to why there seems to be such an unequal distribution. And I want to understand whether there is a rational decision for that. Has it been an inadvertent consequence? And that is something I'm very, very much aware of.
When you get that information, are you then able to share that with the committee, please?
Well, I mean, I would want to be as transparent as possible. I don't want to make a commitment where there might be some procedural or conventional bar to me sharing commercial or sensitive information, but if there's anything you want to add.
Well, I think we'll find a way of sharing whatever it is that we can once that work is complete. And I should add that in addition to a clear inequality in terms of where hotels are located, there's also some inequality in terms of the subsequent accommodation, because not every local authority was taking part in the dispersal system, which is why in April the government introduced a full mandated dispersal model requiring every local authority across the country to take part in order to get more of a fair share across the whole country.
I suppose finally for me then, if I look at my particular local authority of Liverpool, I think it's safe to say, and you know, I know the local authorities share my view on this and my frustration, but communications have been extremely poor. There is a failure by the Home Office to utilise the relationships with the City Council. And although Liverpool is a proud city of sanctuary, there is, or there should be, serious consideration on the impact of unplanned placements on services and community cohesion. I don't think that actually is being done, if I'm honest. The resources are incredibly stretched in the city. The contingency hotel bed space is not included in the new asylum grant. And I know that you've talked about additional funding, Home Secretary, but the contingency hotel bed space is not included in the new asylum grant. So my question is, will additional funds be given to local authorities such as mine in Liverpool to cover the costs of this? Because quite frankly, the city cannot be expected to continue to do this without the appropriate funding and support.
Well, again, I sympathise with the point that you're making on the communication, and I recognise that there has been to date poor communication between the Home Office and local authorities and members of Parliament when a hotel is about to be used for asylum seekers, and I think that can be a very, it's a big change to a local community, and I think it's only fair that people are put on notice in the local area and that there's liaison and there is preparation time, and that's why we've instituted a change in the process. The letter of the 18th of November from my ministerial colleague, the Minister for Immigration, Robert Jenrick, makes clear that we are not happy with the level of engagement. We've heard your frustration, and we do want to ensure that there is a better process in place. That's why we've committed to emailing MPs no less than 24 hours prior to individuals arriving, emailing notification to the local authorities prior to arrival. We want much better written notification of our intention to use a hotel with a fulsome fact sheet and a briefing pack on asylum and asylum support and accommodation. We want more information to be provided to you on the proposed cohort and the actual people who are within limits, but about the people coming, because we accept that this change this change can be very difficult for local communities.
Okay, I'm going to have to ask you to conclude there because we are running out of time, and I'm just very conscious that we've still got members who want to ask questions. Can I just say, perhaps as a helpful comment, that you might want to look at some of your contractors in terms of the hotel accommodation that they commission and use. It seems to me patently obvious that the areas that have the cheapest housing and hotel costs are the ones that have the most asylum seekers. So areas like Liverpool, Bradford, Hull. So that seems to me a patently obvious reason why those areas have got that concentration.
Can I just say very briefly, I am also aware, I am frustrated by the issue with hotels. Okay. I have looked at what kinds of hotels are being used. I don't find it acceptable that in some instances we are housing asylum seekers in 4-star hotels at
that's certainly not the case in Liverpool and Hull and other
So we
areas.
need to fix that
system.
system.
Thank you. Carolyn Harris.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to take you to a different subject because I need to be in the chamber for Welsh questions. And I want to ask you about if you're aware that the CPS this week have dropped a case regarding several men or several persons who've allegedly driven down the Finchley Road earlier this year, chanting very, very anti-Semitic chants at members of the Jewish community who were there. I understand the CPS is not within your domain, but the police are, and I'm asking if you will give consideration to a review into how the police and the CPS look at these kinds of cases. Because currently we have communities who are very scared, very concerned and very, very marginalised, that this kind of behaviour has now gone completely unchallenged.
Well, I was aware of that report, although I don't know the details of it. And as you say, there is an operational independence that the CPS possesses. It is also not under the Home Office remit. So there's very little I can say about a CPS decision to pursue or to drop charges on an individual case. What I do know is they will be complying with the legal tests by which they are bound. And whether it is an evidential matter, whether it's a question of the law, I don't know. But there may well be a variety of reasons. On the broader issue, I mean, this is actually an issue very close to my heart. I have members of my own family who are Jewish, and I really sympathise with the incidents of anti-Semitic hate crime, and I do share your concern that enforcing against it is, in some regards, not sufficiently done. And this is why, we have an organisation like CST, which has come into existence. I visited CST; they do fantastic work, but the fact that the Jewish community has had to fund and resource its own security service because they have felt that they have not been able to rely on public policing and law enforcement is a very sorry state of affairs. So let me take that issue away. I'm not going to commit to a full review. There are many, many reviews going on at the Home Office, and they are all for very important reasons. But I thank you for raising that issue with me.
And one other quick question, which is around the calamitous summer for His Majesty's Passport Office, and what comments the Home Secretary may have on the abysmal performance of Teleperformance, who at the end of July there were 550 passports outstanding. At best, I think people were being answered within 5 hours, including caseworkers from MPs who were trying to help and support constituents. Very many calls went unanswered. The information that was being handed out by telecommunications was of no use whatsoever, as it was they were completely unable to answer questions around how long a passport would be, where it was in the process. And yet Teleperformance went on to receive other government departments. A huge amount of money has gone into this company. Is the Home Secretary convinced that this was value for money, that we are outsourcing at a time when we have a cost of living crisis, and that money could have been spent in this country to beef up our service and not outsource it?
Well, I read with interest over the summer your reports about visa processing, and I noted carefully your concerns about Teleperformance. And I arrived at the Home Office raising these concerns because I wanted to get to the bottom of the problem. I did not want a repeat of the issue. And I'm very glad to say that now we have fixed the problem, actually. There, I would say, I'm quite confident in saying that. We have now resumed the service level and the performance back to, I think it's something like the high 90%, 99% of our issuance is up to our minimum service standard. And we have actually emerged from that problem successfully through a concerted effort of resources and better streamlining. On your question about the contract with Teleperformance, let me hand over to you as to whether you have any views on where we were going with that.
Just to say, we shared your concern about Teleperformance's performance, and we used the contract that we had with them to improve it. And as the Home Secretary said, that did improve over the summer and is now back within acceptable standards. And we have put in place a series of measures since the Home Secretary's first arrival in September to ensure that in 2023 we learn the lessons from 2022, not just in relation to Teleperformance, which is the privatised part of the passport operation, but the whole of the passport operation as well.
Thank you.
And what I would say to people is one of the reasons why we had the problem with visas earlier is a real surge of applications. I would encourage people to get their applications in early and not at the last minute, so we don't have a repeat of
some of those applications had been in a long time.
That's true as well.
This was all entirely predictable as well. Can I just ask, is the standard processing time now down to 3 weeks?
No,
No, it's still at 10 weeks.
It's still at 10
so you
weeks.
haven't gone back to the standard process.
So we've worked really hard. So we've successfully managed the delivery of our annual summer surge of students, and we are currently processing student visas within the 3-week service standard. Priority visas and super priority visa services are still available.
For the general public, it's not a 3-week standard, it's 10 weeks still. Yeah, that
is the case for passports.
Okay.
Yeah.
And could you write to us and tell us how much Teleperformance actually paid in penalties
Yes.
for their poor performance? Thank you. Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. Home Secretary, I'm going back to small boats now. This is now a massive industry. We have the gangs making millions of pounds. We have Serco making millions of pounds. Hotels making millions of pounds. And some dodgy immigration lawyers making millions of pounds. It is a massive, massive industry. And this is because of the pull factor. People are coming here through several countries because there's a massive pull. They're picked up in the sea, they're driven to Manston, they're processed, and then put in hotels, and then dispersed. Until we remove the pull factor, it's never going to stop. And all these dodgy groups are going to keep making millions and millions of pounds at the expense of the taxpayer. And just last week in the Midland Hotel in Mansfield, which looks after homeless people from Mansfield and Ashfield residents, my residents, were turfed out, and illegal immigrants, asylum seekers, were placed in the hotel. What do I say to the people in Ashfield who say to me, this is absolutely ridiculous? We've got hard-working, tax-paying people in Ashfield paying their rates, paying their taxes, helping to look after our own homeless people and put them in local hotels. Now they've been turfed out to put people in who, quite frankly, have been trafficked. They've got no right to be here, and some of them are criminals. Please tell me what I say to them.
Well, I agree that we are in a crisis, and I don't think it's fair to try and minimise the challenge that we are facing, or to suggest that it's easy to fix. The reality is that this is a really complex challenge, and you're absolutely right, you describe it in the right way. This is largely criminal gangs exploiting vulnerable people, selling a lie that they are going to get a better life in the UK, and people are taking massive risks with their own money, with their own livelihoods to get here, and they are breaking our rules, and they are abusing the generosity of the British people, and it needs to stop. And we need to fix this problem. The Prime Minister is absolutely determined to fix it. We need to take a multi-pronged approach. One of the issues, we've touched on it today, is trying to fix our asylum backlog system, because once we get people processed quickly, we can get them out of hotels. And we've talked a bit about that. We also need to change some of our legal frameworks, frankly, because people are coming here and making spurious claims of modern slavery or asylum, and they are gaining and buying time in the UK at the cost of the British taxpayer. So we need to change some of our legal frameworks.
Can I come back on the spurious claims, Home Secretary? Because I know they're making spurious claims, and you know, and most people in the real world know they're making spurious claims. What can we do? Because an immigration lawyer is never going to admit it. A claimant's never going to admit it. So how do we solve that problem?
Well, we did announce earlier that we are going to introduce legislative measures. I can't go into the detail of what that legislation is going to include, because discussions are still live within government. But there is a need to make the rules more robust and the regime tighter. And whether that's effectively, we want to send the message that if you are coming here illegally, you will not be able to stay here, indefinitely in some cases, or for a very long period of time while your asylum claim is being processed. And there is you're not allowed to jump the queue. You're not allowed to play the rules. So that's the regime we need to set up. The Nationality and Borders Act has made some progress in getting to that point, and some of it is due to be operationalised, and the age assessments are one part of that puzzle. So the legal changes will be part of our solution. We also need to work with the prevention and the detection further upstream, and Dan's work with the National Crime Agency. You talked a lot about the criminal element of it. There's been some success between the French authorities and the UK authorities in actually intercepting some of these gangs, arresting hundreds of the individuals who are facilitating the criminal activity and actually resulting in the disbanding of some of these gangs. So that's part of the problem. That won't fix it
One
completely.
more question, Home Secretary.
But it's part of the problem, part of the solution.
Time. I'm being told that hotels all over the country are being offered twice as much money to accept asylum seekers, illegal immigrants, as they are to house homeless people or just normal tourists. Is that true?
So I don't know the specific terms contained in the contracts relating to particular hotels. What I do know, however, is that there has been a paucity of supply of hotels which have been available for this particular
We were
use.
told, Home Secretary, during COVID that the reason that immigrants were in hotels was to stem the flow of the virus, to control the virus. The virus is gone now, but we're putting more in hotels. Why?
We're putting more in hotels because we cannot procure enough private rented accommodation via local authorities.
Can I just put it to you, Home Secretary, we're putting more in hotels because the Home Office has failed to control our borders and it's not fit for purpose at the moment.
Well, we have failed to control our borders, yes, and that's why the Prime Minister and myself are absolutely determined to fix this problem.
Can I just ask, you said on the floor of the House that legislation would be introduced later this year, and we're just conscious there's only a few days left until the end of this year. So is that still going to happen? Are we going to see some legislation introduced?
Well, I can't commit to a timeline today, I have to say, but legislation will be introduced.
Okay. You did say later this year. So
right. Well,
that's not going to happen.
I can't go into too much detail, but there's been lots of changes in government. There's been, we are working at pace to introduce the legislation. Ideally it would be by the end of this year. That may slip, I have to say.
Okay, thank you. James Daly.
Thank you very much, Chair. Why can't decision makers make 15 cases a week, decide 15 cases a week?
Well, that's a very good question, and one that I myself have posed. What we have found is that there's often the applications are incredibly voluminous with their paperwork and the kind of substance that's put into those claims, and sometimes they involve very complex issues, quite personal matters, issues relating to vulnerable people, and what I've been told is it is very difficult to make decisions at that kind of level.
Well, I think that anybody looking at this situation, and perhaps Mr. Rycroft can tell me if I'm wrong, the fact that we've got to a situation where only one decision per week was being made is the height of rank incompetence or bad management. And I think it goes to Mr. Anderson's point that the most basic tasks are not being carried out in anywhere near an efficient manner. So, Mr. Radcliffe, can you just tell us what this lack of productivity and the grand gesture that we need to get to 3 decisions a week? I mean, that is a scandal. 3 decisions a week in any other industry, that would be laughable. So, could you please give me some reassurance we're going to get into more than that?
So what I can do, Mr. Daly, is to set out the differences between a decision in relation to someone's asylum claim and other decisions that other Home Office teams are making day in, day out, which are much more at the volume that you're talking about, in fact, much higher than that. So if you take another example, the EU settlement scheme, for instance, which very successfully provided decisions on status for, I think, over 6 million EU nationals, decision makers in that team on that scheme were taking, I think, more than 15 decisions per day, not even per week. That's because it was compared to this, a very simple yes or no decision. But whereas someone's asylum claim, as the Home Secretary said, it often comes with a very significant set of paperwork, which depends crucially on not just the circumstances in the country to which they come from, but also their very particular claims for persecution or whatever it is. I'm not denying that one decision per caseworker per week is too low. It is much too low. But it would be unreasonable also to think you could get to 15 a day in that world.
If I was looking, if you were to show me, I'm assuming I don't know, it's paper files, electronic files, but a file that a decision maker has made, whether it is to grant or not, what would I see within that file? How many pieces of paper would I see?
Well, there'd be a lot, and it's not just when we talk about the decision. We're also talking about the things that go into the decision, including the interview, which takes up many hours.
So let's go through this. We've got the interview. What else have we got that's part of the process?
You've got all of the background about the country and the person's claim for asylum, all of their particular family and identity documentation and so on. It's a very significant pack of paperwork. I'm totally agreeing with you that the productivity needs to get to be much higher than it is, which is why we have the scheme in place to get to 3 decisions per case of worker per week by May, and then beyond that to 4. Yes, it will. Yes, it will.
We're going to be back here having exactly the same conversation, because there is no desire, as far as I can see, on the evidence I see from the Home Office, to put in place a process which is rigorous, demanding, and takes into account the circumstances. From what I understand, Mr. Rycroft, what you're saying, the person comes in, provides some documents, an interview has taken place, perhaps there's a phone call. That does not take hours and hours and hours of work to do. It just doesn't, does it?
I share your ambition to increase the productivity of this set of caseworkers. We have got a very significant programme of work in place, including starting off with the pilot in Leeds that the Home Secretary has already mentioned, and rolling that out to other decision-making hubs across the UK, so that eventually through next year we do get to those sorts of levels, which will be high enough to clear the backlog and to deal with the incoming flow. And we are absolutely determined to do that. I just want to point out the difference in complexity of an individual's life. To pick another example, the Windrush Compensation Scheme, which we haven't talked about today, but often we do, is also a scheme which requires essentially very slow decision making, because that is about the whole life of someone, and so the decisions per caseworker per week on that scheme are even lower than they would be on asylum, because the complexity is even greater.
Because of time, unfortunately, I'd like to ask a lot more questions, but obviously we're here elected representatives of the people. We're not here just having an intellectual discussion between ourselves in this room. And many of my constituents, many of the people I meet around the country, if they understand that people are coming here illegally, they want to know why those people cannot be sent straight back to Albania immediately. Could you please give them an answer to that question?
Yeah. Because they will put in a legal claim, whether it's for asylum or whether it's for modern slavery. And once they put in a claim, that triggers duties on the part of the UK state to consider those claims. And they are allowed to stay in this country while those claims are being processed and considered.
So in terms of, if that is the issue, then are we, as we are both members of the same party, are we looking at legislation to address that problem, to make sure that we have the legal power and right to deport illegal immigrants immediately?
Well, I can't go into the detail of the legislative measures that we're looking at, but we do want to make it easier to remove people from the UK, and we want to try and avoid this problem that we are facing right now, which is that people are able to stay here while their claim is pending. That is what is so important about the Rwanda scheme, because once Rwanda is operationalised, it will mean that we will be able to remove people and their claim for asylum will be considered abroad, and that will enable a swifter turnaround.
The other thing you could say to your constituents, Mrs. Daly, is that this is not just a UK issue. We've been focusing here about the UK aspects of it and our system and how to improve that. But other countries are going through similar things. Twice as many people claim asylum each year in France as in the UK. 3 or 4 times as many as the UK in Germany. So we're talking about a global challenge here, which requires global solutions.
If we get to the situation where people are referred into the modern slavery, into the mechanism for that, it's taking about 450 days for that to be decided. Why can't those claims be decided within 28 days?
Well, there's a legal requirement that that it takes a minimum period of time, and 28 days is outside of our legal minimum.
What's the legal minimum?
Legal minimum is now Did we move it to
45, I think.
45
I think
yes.
we better,
40.
45, I think, but we're subject to confirmation.
The
Yeah,
legal
so
minimum,
check
sorry,
that.
Home Secretary, I need to make this point.
Yeah.
Why can't we do it within 45 days with proper management, proper people in place, and a proper system to address within 45 days these claims and get people who, if the claims are successful, fine, within 45 days, and have a process by where people who fail can be removed from this country?
Well, it used to take around that amount of time because the numbers claiming were far lower than they are today. And frankly, the national referral mechanism, which is the process through which they go, has been overwhelmed. And now we have, far many. There were 2,500 NRM referrals for Albanian nationals in the whole of 2021, and that is a far greater number than we've seen in years prior to that. That high number of cases in our NRM has made it a lot more of a slower process.
You've answered that quickly. Can I ask one question about
Very
rape
quickly, and then
sexual-
I'm going to bring in Tim.
Another scandal in this country, in my view, is rape and serious sexual offending. 2 years ago, 1 in 100 people who made a claim of rape would lead to a charge. We have ridiculously low charging rates. The problem within the system, Home Secretary, as far as I'm concerned, and we've spoken about this many times, is the lack of referrals from the police to the Crown Prosecution Service. Could I ask what you are doing to encourage, well, not just encourage, telling the police to refer more of these cases to the CPS so that more women and girls can get justice, because they're not getting justice at this moment in time?
Well, you're absolutely right that the police are referring a very low number of complaints to the CPS. The last figure I saw was around 7%, but I think it has actually increased in recent months. But that proportion and volume needs to increase. We have been putting a lot of effort into trying to fix this problem. Operation Soteria is something which I think is innovative. It's about the closer working between the CPS and the police, because what we're finding is that the police will either...
Can I just stop you there? I think the question was what you were going to do. We're very familiar with this whole area. We've produced a report which I hope you might have had an opportunity to look at. So we're very familiar with this, but I think the specific question was what you were going to do.
Yeah. So Operation Soteria, rollout of Operation Soteria, which I have a lot of confidence in, which is about the operational relationship between the police and the CPS, better scrutiny of the decisions that both our agencies are making, and ensuring that there is more support for victims and a swifter and a greater referral rate from police to CPS, and then ideally an increased charge rate. We are working to support victims. Ultimately, if the victim drops out of the process before charge or before referral, then a police officer cannot refer it. We need more, the level of ISVAs has been incredibly helpful for supporting victims through this process. But I agree, the end-to-end rape review sets out what we are doing. There's been an update on progress there.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry to have to cut you off. It's just that
No,
there
sure.
are some other issues that we haven't been able to address this morning, and I do want to give Tim and Simon an opportunity to raise them. So it might be that you have to write with the responses, but over to you, Tim.
Thank you, Chair. There are an awful lot of other things we haven't been able to cover today, so perhaps we can see you again before Christmas, Home Secretary, for round 2, because I think there's a lot of questions we want to ask. I want to ask about the very disruptive demonstrations, another issue which has been clogging up all of our email boxes. So another bit of role play. I have formed a new group called Just Stop Oil. And together with other members of the committee, we are gluing ourselves to the highway outside the driveway of the organiser of Just Stop Oil. What will happen to me?
Well, if you are... in an ideal world, I have to just say...
No, not in an ideal world. What will happen to me now? I am glued to the pavement.
Well, the police will attend, and the police have been investing huge amounts of police time, effort and resource into policing protests to the tune of tens of millions of pounds, thousands of police hours. So they will attend, and they will attend as swiftly as possible. They will then assess what you're doing and look at you, and they will assess whether they consider that there is a reasonable basis for an arrest, whether that's obstruction of the highway, whether that is criminal damage, whether that's any other legal offence that they can identify. And if they do so, then they will
How long
arrest
should that
you.
take?
Listen, it varies depending on the circumstances. When we saw the people hanging from the gantries, that was taking hours.
Okay, I'm glued
because
to
it's
the
very
pavement. How long
hard to
should it-
remove
how
people
long
from
should it
gantries.
take?
I'm not a frontline professional.
Okay.
I don't want to put a
Why
time
is
on
it you understand the complete frustration of our constituents,
Yeah.
unable to go about their daily business through no fault of their own, and why the public are taking the law into their own hands and removing some of these people, with the police standing by telling them not to, and in some cases arresting members of the public. Under Section 137 of the Highways Act, it is an offence if a person without lawful authority or excuse in any way wilfully obstructs the free passage along a highway. Under Section 11 of the Public Order Act 1986, against protests, if a protest is to intimidate others and compel them not to do something that they have the right to do, or not do something that they have the right not to so do. Those are two very clear existing parts of the law that should make it very easy for an attending police officer very swiftly to remove people who are obstructing the highway and intimidating people trying to go about their lawful business. Why are the police taking ages to intervene and people's lives are being disrupted?
Well, I think there is guidance which has been issued by the College of... So I've taken a real interest in the problem that you're highlighting, and I do have some concerns. I think on the whole, the police have been very robust and done, acted very admirably in the circumstances, and I back
Why have they
them.
acted
But what I
admirably?
would... Well, they have. When it comes to Just Stop Oil, since April of 2022, they've arrested 1,700 people. They've arrested on the M25 protests in the beginning of November. They arrested 64 people.
How many of them
Between
are
the
in
first on the month of October, the Met Police alone arrested 677 people.
The
There are
point
many
is
examples.
how long it takes
Yeah.
before their disruption
Yeah.
is removed, and how many of them are actually in jail receiving a meaningful and proportionate penalty for the very substantial disruption that they've been committing. Are you happy with the College of Policing's 5-step appeal guidance, which is a simple appeal to ask the person to comply, a reasoned appeal, a personal appeal, the 4th stage is a final appeal, and then eventually action? It's a nonsense, isn't it? We know what they are doing, and they are getting the extended publicity from doing it, and then they're getting little more than a slap on the wrist, and as we've seen in the Van Gogh protesters, one of them even only a suspended sentence. It's making a mockery of the government's claim to be the party and the government of law and order, isn't it, whilst this is going on?
Well, I have looked at the College of Policing guidance on protests, and I have some questions about it. And I am going to be speaking to the College of Policing. I want to look and ensure that the police are following a robust guidance, and that is a live question for me in the Home Office.
Okay.
I would also say, there was a recent case of Ziegler, and we saw some of the cases relating to protests, like the Colston Statute case, which I referred as Attorney General to the Court of Appeal on this very issue, on the
Okay,
legal
perhaps you could-
framework.
you could
There are
write.
human rights considerations.
Okay, perhaps you could
and that is the legal framework within which
I
we are
think
working.
If you could write to us with anything else you want to tell us. Simon, I know we've got very little time left. Do you want to just raise the issue and then we'll get it in writing from the Home Secretary?
If I may, thank you, and I beg your indulgence for just a couple of minutes. So, no role play with me, just want to talk about fraud. So it's the number one crime in the UK. 41%, I think, of all crimes are fraud or fraud related. I spent a decade working in fraud and financial crime with government, with law enforcement, with industry, trying to get them to work better together before I came here. And much to my frustration, when a constituent comes to me and says they've been defrauded out of £20,000, I still don't know what to do to help them. The PM said that there was a fraud plan forthcoming. My question to you is, when can we expect it, and can we expect it to meet the scale of the challenge that our constituents are facing at the moment?
Well, you are right that we will be publishing a new fraud strategy to address exactly the issue that you've raised. And I do think that this is a big priority for us because of the relevance that it plays in modern day crime fighting. And we need, to think about all options. I think prevention actually is far better than cure. I'm very keen to explore ways in which the telecoms companies, the software companies, the banks, law enforcement can all work better together and use technology to prevent hackers getting to your constituent, whereby she is handing over her life savings online. We shouldn't be getting, when we get to that point, we're actually too late. So I think there's a massive prevention element that I want to lead and instigate, and that will be set out in the forward strategy. Secondly, I also think our policing...
Can we have this in writing, because we really are running very short on time? And I just wanted to raise with you, if you would write to me as well, about, I would like to know about Linton on Ouse and why the decision to cancel that happened at a time when you were very short of accommodation to move people out of Manston. So could I have an explanation for that? Could you also set out, I think you'd already agreed to do this, the information around the exceptional circumstances around detaining people beyond 24 hours, how many people were detained up to the 5-day limit, and then how many additional people were detained beyond 5 days? That would be very helpful to have that. And could I also ask if we could see the advice that was given to members of staff at Manston, so Border Force, immigration officers and contractors, about the legal basis of Manston and what powers members of staff, Border Force, immigration officers had and could use. I think that would be very helpful as well, if I could ask for that information to be sent to the committee. Can I thank all three
Can I
of
just
you?
clarify? You asked me about the judicial reviews issued around Manston. I've got a clarification for you. So there are no actual judicial reviews which have been issued, i.e. in claim forms, but there are pre-action protocol letters which we have received, and there are 5 pre-action protocol letters that we have received.
Okay, thank you for that. Can I thank all three of you for attending today? The concentration has obviously been on immigration and Manston and small boat crossings, but as Tim Lawton said, there are many other issues that we remain very concerned about and will be wanting to ask questions of. We're grateful for you attending today, Home Secretary. We hope we can get a date in the diary, if not before Christmas, very early in 2023, to carry on asking you questions and scrutinising the work of this very important department. So thank you for your time today.
With pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.